What's going on? As I'm doing my best Lucas impersonation, welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast. I'm hosting today. Not really. Oh. I'm doing it really just because there's a special introduction that needs to happen for this episode because someone is back, okay? And it's not just somebody. It's the world-renowned TikTok creating aficionado, because people are now stealing our content because of Cam's ideas. Just saying. I did give it away just there. Let's take a minute and just welcome back Cameron to the podcast. Round of applause. Yeah.
Thank you. It has been too long, let me tell you.
Too long indeed. It is so good to have you back. So good to have you, the listener, back. But Cameron, how's it going, man? The people need to hear how you've been doing. What's new in your world? Because if I'm not mistaken, there was something pretty big that happened pretty recently for you.
Yeah, it's been a long couple weeks. 3 weeks ago now, went on a family vacation with my wife's family. So I was out then, and then we were preparing for a cross-country move to Florida the next 2 weeks. That's where I was. And then this last week, a week ago now on Wednesday, we started our 2-day trek from Minnesota to Florida, driving down. We went it was supposed to be only 13 miles the first day. 10:30, getting to Nashville, big accident, hour and a half and standstill traffic. Second we pull into Nashville, AC goes out. No AC, 83 and humid. Been in the car for 13 and a half hours. Just brutal. We get in the car the next day. We drive all the way to Florida. We get to our apartment, start putting stuff in. We unload our entire U-Haul. We're walking around it. We realize that this place is not livable. And so the next day we were on the phone because we, had a whole mix-up. Got out of that lease, luckily. Repacked our entire U-Haul. Toured another apartment. Loved it. Moved all the way moved to my parents who were 30 minutes away. Stayed there for 3 days. Got this apartment. Have been unpacking. Finally coming together. Finally got my setup. It's nice to have a consistent area. We got our new mics, our new booms. I mean, it is incredible now. So it was a rough couple weeks, but now I'm excited. I'm ready to talk football. Football's only a couple weeks away. We're getting pumped. It's all in the past. I'm ready to go, Ty.
Yeah, we're even planning out a couple business retreats too, and business opportunity, trips and stuff. So things are
write-offs.
Yeah, it's just celebrate the year that was the Fantasy Football Fellas.
Yes.
I bet people would understand that a little bit.
131,000 on TikTok. We're up 100K in 4 months. We got to celebrate a little bit.
We're not tooting our own horn over here, but just saying we do kind of have, we do have some credibility. Okay, geez. So, but yeah, like I said, Cameron's back. It's me, Ty, on the other side, over still in the wonderful state of Minnesota, as I'm going to try to guilt trip Cam into moving back to Minnesota because seriously,
a couple years and we'll be back. Couple years.
I mean, look, there will be frequent visits,
of course,
on business trips. We'll call it business trips,
of course.
But yeah, I mean, there's really not much else that needs to be said before we get into today's topic. Maybe what I should do, as I learned from Lucas in our last episode, let's read off our social handles here real quick. Not just for the fellas, but for our personals, because you know what? We need to kind of start growing the individual pages just a little bit more. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All right, so let's start off with this fellas socials. Obviously TikTok, as we mentioned before, Fantasy Football Fellas. Not hard to find us. Over on Twitter, we are at FFFellas. That is 3 F's, Ellas.
There you go.
Instagram, the FFF Fellas, and then over on YouTube, just search Fantasy Football Fellas. We'll show up. Just
Beautiful.
anywhere you go, just look for the triple Fs. That's all you got to do. Right? Now for the personals, over on Twitter, Tyler_Platt is mine. Cameron, yours is Cam Law
317.
317. Oh, I was halfway there. And then Lucas is Lucas. Let's see, _Wenzel, I think.
I think it's just Lucas Wenzel.
Oh, it is Lucas Wenzel. You're right. You're right.
Wenzel, Lucas. One of the two.
Well, just search Lucas Wenzel and you'll find him.
Speaking of Lucas, did Lucas drop his news on the last podcast episode?
I don't think so because he is quite the humble person. So,
well, we're gonna drop it for him and do it right. Lucas is gone today. He is at a work thing. But Lucas has recently partnered with Fantasy Pros to be a TikTok creator for them. You can find him posting a couple times a week over on their page. He's not leaving us. We are still the priority. But man, he is going places. We love to see it. We love the brand to be spread all over. So next time you see Lucas or next time you're commenting on something, congratulate him. Let him know, hey man, great work, because he deserves it. All right, that's enough gassing up Lucas. We don't want that head to get too big.
He's not even here to accept it. So what's the point?
I mean, he can't beat me in fantasy, but he might be able to make better videos than me. Just saying.
Boy.
Just saying.
Oh boy. We're not going down that rabbit hole. Not tonight. Not tonight.
Coming out firing.
Yeah, he's off for what, 3 weeks, and now he has to get his shots in because we just took unnecessary shots at you while you were gone.
Of course. All righty. Well, should we jump in the news and notes?
Really, I mean, I'll say this real quick. We don't normally do these on the second episode in the same week, but there's just one very big piece of news that we do have to mention in this episode.
For sure, and that is the Deshaun Watson suspension was moved to 11 games and a $5 million fine. This was agreed on by the NFL and NFLPA. Watson technically could still sue the NFL, but even if he did, it would not really go anywhere. So we aren't going to get into all the logistics of what this means or whether we think he should have more games or less games, but we'll talk about it from a fantasy perspective. Obviously, Deshaun Watson, if you're in a single QB league, probably even double QB league, just any redraft in general, you should not be drafting him. 11 weeks is just too long to hold on to a guy who's like, he's not going to play the first 11 weeks, first 12 weeks of the season because of a bye. But Ty, I do want to ask you, looking at the running backs, Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, how do you think it affects their stock with Deshaun Watson being suspended?
I think it really kind of helps out Kareem Hunt more than it does Nick Chubb. And we all know that Kareem Hunt has a trade request in with the front office there in Cleveland, so he may not even be there at the beginning of the season. But no, I think the biggest takeaway is that this team is now one-dimensional again, right? Or this offense is one-dimensional, and it's the run game. So, I mean, Nick Chubb has proved in the past that it doesn't really matter how many people you put in the box. He will still be a good runner. But it doesn't really help him out in any kind of way. And when you're already, not really involved in the passing game, it's kind of like a double whammy in some ways. So I'm not going to say trend down on Nick Chubb. I'm not going to say trend up on Kareem Hunt. But if Kareem Hunt stays in Cleveland, he may be the better value for a Cleveland running back. And I know I don't really make hot takes in non-divisional breakdown episodes, but I might say that Kareem Hunt's the better value right now in drafts. So
I would definitely agree with better value. They might finish pretty close. I think Nick Chubb will still get the yards. The only thing that I could see going down is touchdowns, just because they won't have as many touchdown opportunities as they would with Deshaun Watson. Obviously, Amari Cooper is trending downward. You go from what could have been Deshaun Watson to Jacoby Brissett. Any wide receiver, that's going to be a downward trend. David Njoku, I was looking at from friend of the pod, Alex Caruso, is putting out some stats on Twitter, just showing how Jacoby Brissett does like to target the tight end. That's something that he's done in the past. So while I don't think that it's like Njoku's all of a sudden like one of my favorite tight ends, I think he's pretty much just stays the same. He's not trending kind of like we were saying about the running back, not trending up, not trending down. Let me ask you: is there anybody else in this offense that you take a chance on in fantasy football this season, knowing that Deshaun's gonna be out 11 weeks, or is just that kind of killed any other options in Cleveland?
I think you really did kind of kill off any other options. I mean, you look at guys like Donovan Peoples-Jones, and a toss up between like Anthony Schwartz and David Bell. They would have only had relevancy or at least notability because of Deshaun Watson, and now that Watson's out for half the year, it really is now just a 4-man show. Maybe 4? Yeah, 4. With Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, Amari Cooper, David Njoku. It's just those 4 players, no one else.
For sure. Yeah, so that pretty much does it for entire news and notes. It was just Cleveland Browns based. Interesting that the first game that Deshaun Watson does have back is against the Texans. So, if he looks like we know how he can play, they should blow them out. If he looks like he did in the preseason, it might be a pretty close game. So
I was gonna say though, I mean he gets suspended for half of this year. He didn't play at all last year. That game against Houston is going to be the first time that he has played in a meaningful football game in a year and a half. So that also doesn't really bode bode well for anyone that's thinking about taking Deshaun Watson in fantasy at all this year, really.
For sure. All right, Ty, I'm going to leave it up to you because we are going to transition to breaking down our top 20 fantasy wide receivers. Do you want to go 20-1, or are you feeling 1-20? Because we can go either way.
I think we go 20-1, and I know I bet people can probably guess who majority of the top 5 receivers are that we have, but there's a lot more to talk about from 20 to 6 than there is 5-1, if that makes sense.
Yes, 100%.
So we go. Let's go 20-1.
Alrighty. So our doc has actually changed. Earlier we had at 20 was Mr. Terry McLaurin, but now we have Deante Johnson, and I can't say I hate it. I think they're both right around that range. So we'll talk about Deante. We can talk about Terry more in a different episode. But Deontay Johnson finished as wide receiver 8 last season. With Big Ben, he was a wide receiver 19 in weeks 1 through 6, and over the rest of the season, he was a wide receiver 6. And the funny part about that is, in the beginning half of the season, he actually averaged more points. He was averaging 18.4 points to start the season. It was a wide receiver 19, and averaging 16.6 to end the season. But correct me if I'm wrong, but he did miss a game.
He missed the game. He did. He missed one game.
All right. So that was big. He was second in targets last year. Really big benefactor from Big Ben. Lucas has him a wide receiver 18. Tyre in the middle of us, a wide receiver 21, and I'm at wide receiver 25. Let me ask you, what is the ceiling for Deontay Johnson? Because we know he's kind of a safe player, but is there really a ceiling with him this season?
I honestly think his ceiling could be a low end wide receiver 1 this year, just because he's shown in years past that he can be a target hog, as we say. Do I think it'll be like that? Probably not. That's why I've got him so low in my rankings, just because you're going from noodle arm Ben Roethlisberger to Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, somewhere in there. So the ball is not really going to be thrown short as often as it was with Ben Roethlisberger. But if you believe that Deontay Johnson has become one of the better wide receivers in the league, he's absolutely worth taking at where he's going in drafts right now, which I think is right at 20, if I'm not mistaken.
It's right around there, yeah.
So if you are a believer in the talent of Deontay Johnson, you should have no reason not to take him where he's going right now in drafts.
For sure. Does George Pickens affect your view on Deontay Johnson all this season, or do you think George Pickens can be good well Deante Johnson can also be a good fantasy wide receiver?
I think Pickens affects Chase Claypool more than Deontay Johnson, because I think Claypool and Pickens are very, very similar, and I mean, I see them just both as big, deep threat targets, right? Like Deontay can do anything from the slot, can play outside even. We saw that a little bit last year, but I really think Pickens is more of a complement to Johnson than he is like a vulture that takes away targets or anything like that.
For sure. Well, I won't add anything more to Deontay Johnson. I think you summed that up really well. Moving on to our number 19 guy, and I'm going to just talk about this guy. And I'm not
You
going to
go
talk
ahead.
This is Mr. DK Metcalf, who was the wide receiver 14 in 2021. Lucas has him it is unbelievable. Wide receiver 26. I can't even believe it. You got him at wide receiver 20. I have him at wide receiver 14. And let me just say, last season, we were banging the drum that DK Metcalf was overvalued. And now he is dropping like a fly in underdog drafts. I think he's at wide receiver 27 now in underdog
Yeah,
drafts.
he's late 20s now.
Just an incredible value. Looking like Gino Smith more and more is going to be the starter in Seattle. When he had Gino Smith, he was the wide receiver 8, and he was averaging 17.2 fantasy points per game. Yes, one of those games was inflated by a 70-yard touchdown. But DK Metcalf can get the job done. Physically, he's like a tight end. Like, he looks like a tight end, 6'4", 230 pounds, but he runs a 4.4. His route running has been getting better year after year. I mean, he is incredibly strong, and I think this is the first year where he truly overtakes Tyler Lockett, where it's like it's DK at the 1, Tyler Lockett firmly in this second spot in this offense. And so, well, I don't think like efficiency-wise he's going to be unbelievable like he has been. I still think he's going to see 150, 155 targets this season. I still think that he can score close to 10 touchdowns. Gino Smith might only throw 15 passing touchdowns, and DK Metcalf could have 9 of them. Like that, I don't feel like that's that far out of the realm of possibilities just because of the kind of player that he is. That's why I have him so high, because I believe in the talent of DK Metcalf. I don't know if you want anything to add as kind of you and Lucas more the pessimists on DK this year.
I wouldn't call myself a pessimist, because I'm also becoming more and more, to the light of DK Metcalf. But I think the biggest thing, or the biggest reason why people are out on DK Metcalf, is because of the quarterback play.
100%.
And this is where you see if people have done their research or not, because while we're not saying that DK Metcalf can be a consistent top 10 wide receiver with Geno Smith, we're saying that there's still value for where he's going, and he will finish higher because he is DK Metcalf. Okay. Like he's an insane red zone target. He's an insane possession wide receiver for an offense that needs to get the ball downfield somehow, right? Like there's value with DK Metcalf. So don't automatically write him off just because it's Geno Smith or Drew Lock throwing the ball. I mean, Drew Lock has even had success with big wide receivers, right? Like Cortland Sutton has been a notable name in fantasy football for years now because of quarterback play. I shouldn't say because of quarterback play, but he had Drew Lock throwing the ball, right? Like these guys like bigger targets, and DK Metcalf fits that profile to a T.
100%. I think the problem with DK is the second year he's going to try and comparisons to Calvin Johnson. And so now, obviously he's not going to live up to that. So now we consider him super overvalued, but he's not. All right, let's move on to our next guy. So our next guy actually had a really disappointing season last year. And that is Allen Robinson. It was just awful. Lucas has him at wide receiver 19. Ty, you have him wide receiver 16. I got him at 22. According to your rankings, you kind of consider last year as a wash. Do you want to just talk about kind of your outlook for Allen Robinson this season? Why are you optimistic on a guy who was just terrible last year?
Yeah, so I say last year was a wash just because we all know the situation that is, or the the team that is the Chicago Bears. Okay, they are not competitive. They are rebuilding. And for Allen Robinson, who was playing on a franchise tag last year, like he didn't want to come back. That was the big thing. He didn't want to come back to Chicago, but he did because he saw the money, and Chicago wouldn't trade him, even though that's what Chicago should have done instead of just letting him go for free. I digress. Allen Robinson is getting an upgrade in quarterback, upgrade in system, upgrade in offensive line, and everywhere you look, he gets an upgrade. And I think the best stat that shows that like he will have usage in this offense is that Robert Woods was a top 15 option before going down with an ACL injury last year. Granted, it did take a while for Robert Woods to kind of get going, but eventually he got going, and it had him in the top, and he was in the top 15 before his season ended. So you combine all of that with the fact that the Rams coaches so far in training camp are absolutely in love with Allen Robinson and what he can bring to the table. I'm back in on Allen Robinson. I'm I had a hot take last year saying that he was a top 5 wide receiver when Justin Fields steps in as quarterback.
You just missed it.
Yeah, just missed it by a little bit, just a tad. But again, I think the overarching thread in that is he is uber talented still, and you combine that dynamic offense, Matt Stafford, Sean McVay calling plays. It's just all good things for Allen Robinson this year, honestly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. He's in the best spot to succeed. Like if he doesn't succeed here, he really is washed. But you just saw a guy that didn't look like he wanted to be there last year. That's what the film showed. But we're gonna move on to our wide receiver 17, and he is Mr. Consistent. He is 14 points a game, no matter what, no matter the offense, no matter who they're playing, and that is Mr. Brandon Cooks. Luke is at wide receiver 16. Ty, you're at 17. I'm at 19. All like within the same area. Kind of. I think we should kind of expound on that before we jump into Brandon Cooks. Actually, real quick, is the difference between like my wide receiver. I can actually look at it real quick. The difference between my wide receiver 20 and my wide receiver 19, or what? No, wide 2019 wide receiver 16. So or 22 to 16 is 8 fantasy points. It's a 10-yard touchdown catch. That's the difference going each way. So these guys are really close. That's why when we kind of look at it, we're still in this kind of more like at low end wide receiver 2 tier right now. It's kind of where we're at with Brandon Cooks, with Allen Robinson, DK Metcalf, Deontay Johnson, Terry McLaurin. They kind of all fit in that bubble. But like I was saying, he's been Mr. Consistent. He's had one season since 2015 where he's finished outside the top 20. And in that season, he was injured in Los Angeles. Ty, is there any reason to doubt Brandon Cooks this year, or are we just going to assume 14 fantasy points a game?
Always assume 14 fantasy points a game. I mean, maybe the Texans run the ball a little more often this year. That's been their top priority all offseason, building up offensive line, grabbing Damian Pierce in the draft. But Davis Mills has to throw the ball to somebody. With John Mechie out for the year and Nico Collins is the number 2, I think that's enough to be said about Brandon Cooks.
For sure. We just can't say him anymore. He's just not flashy. He's always constantly underrated, but he's going to get you 14 fantasy points a game. So if you need a solid wide receiver 2, you take him. If you're taking a CeeDee Lamb, who you're kind of taking a shot on, who, we all project high things for CeeDee Lamb, but he's never proven that he can be a wide receiver 1. Maybe you want a guy, or a Mike Williams, if he ends up being your wide receiver 1. You want a guy like Brandon Cooks who's going to get you consistent points. Next guy on our list is DJ Moore. And I know you do, and me too. We want to see him with a great quarterback because we think he can be really special. Lucas and I have him at wide receiver 17. You're at wide receiver 14. Obviously, it was just looked great when Sam Darnold looked great and CMC was on the field. CMC gets hurt. Darnold looks awful. There's not much for that entire Panthers offense to do when Sam Darnold looked abysmal in some of those games. Like, it looked like he was seeing ghosts again. Now Baker Mayfield enters. Is Baker Mayfield going to unlock DJ Moore this season, Tyler?
I'm laughing because that's a joke within the fellas. I'm sorry to leave you hanging on an edge like that, but like he's not going to unlock DJ Moore. I mean, if we think Baker Mayfield is going to unlock DJ Moore, then please explain to me why he didn't, unleash and, he had Odell Beckham Jr. and Jarvis Landry, and he did jack squat with them. So we need to kind of pump the brakes a little bit when it comes to like how high DJ Moore can finish with Baker Mayfield. But here's the thing. DJ Moore, he finished as the wide receiver 18, going from Sam Darnold to Cam Newton to PJ Walker starting games. I don't think anyone can give me three worse quarterbacks to play for in a single season, okay?
Yeah.
And you have McCaffrey out, so you are literally the only guy in this offense that is going to, get the offense going. And I think the big concern with DJ Moore is, CMC is back, so like he's kind of the number 2 guy. Here's the thing. When they played together last year, it didn't really affect DJ Moore at all, honestly. Week 1, DJ Moore finished with 15 fantasy points, which is good for wide receiver 31. Not super great, but it's early in the season. Random wide receivers will finish top of, wide receiver points just because it's the beginning of the season. Week 2, he finished with 21. Okay, even better. Week 9, when McCaffrey came back, DJ Moore only finished with 7 fantasy points. But you know why? It's because he played against New England, okay? Not much is going to happen when Carolina and New England meet up in a regular season match, okay? Week 10, then, he finishes with 6 points. And you're like, so why is that a positive thing for DJ Moore? Because that was the Cam Newton game, okay? So Cam Newton's coming back, and he's screaming, I'm back, I'm back. You can chalk that one up to just a one-off, right? Like that didn't happen again. And then in week 11, he finished with 16 fantasy points. Good for wide receiver 22. DJ Moore is just fine. He will be just fine. If anything, he gets a tiny, tiny upgrade in quarterback that could put him into the top 15, but like low-end top 15.
Yeah. I mean, he's a guy, 1,100 yards, 4 touchdowns is his floor. And so maybe Baker finds a way to give him 7 touchdowns this season and 1,200 yards. All of a sudden, he's borderline wide receiver 1. I think right around where you got him is probably my ceiling for DJ Moore, but I also think my floor is wide receiver 19. Like, he's a guy who's going to finish there. He's super talented. He's just on an offense that I don't think is going to allow him to really show what he's got.
They also had an offensive coordinator change halfway through the year, if I'm not mistaken. So that also doesn't help him out at all.
They got rid of Joe Brady. So DJ Moore, I think, is kind of our guy who's right on that edge of moving up into the next tier wide receivers, but still kind of in that lower end wide receiver 2. I would personally put DK in that spot 2 with DJ Moore, but I know it's different for you guys. But number 15 for us is Mr. A.J. Brown, who has loads and loads of talent, but we haven't really seen it for a full season. And now he goes to the team that passed even less than the Titans last season, the Philadelphia Eagles. After finishing wide receiver 32 in 2021, Lucas has him at 14. I got him at 13. Ty, you're down at 18. And I can't say I blame you, to be honest. Like, it just feels like there's so much to be pessimistic about A.J. Brown this season. He's in Devonte Smith, we cannot act like he is a slouch. I mean, the guy had the most receiving yards in a college season his last year at Alabama. He was unbelievable. And then he goes into last season, he was at 930 yards and 6 touchdowns. If Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase don't happen, we are looking at, Devonta Smith having a great rookie season. But because we're so used to this, 1,600 yards and 11 touchdowns, we're like, why doesn't he have that? But that's not feasible for 99.9% of rookies. So, Ty, do you see any optimistic part for A.J. Brown going into this season?
I mean, I guess there is a little bit, just because you look at where A.J. Brown is at in his career compared to Devonte Smith. Devonte Smith is still kind of, adjusting, you could say, or getting used to the NFL, right? Just being a rookie last year and stuff. But like, A.J. Brown's a really good wide receiver. So you have to give him some credit when it comes to like how high he can finish. But it's when Nick Sirianni is your play caller, when Jalen Hurts is your quarterback, I don't care how good your connection is. That ball is going to be run. It's going to be like painfully annoying how often they run the ball when they have guys like AJ Brown, Devonte Smith, and Dallas Goedert. Is there an opportunity for Jalen Hurts to kind of show off the arm this year? I think so, because this is like a make or break year for Jalen Hurts, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't trust Jalen Hurts to do so. Maybe I need to watch a little bit closer in these, I guess their game is coming up in a couple days, so I can watch it then. But like, I don't
blame
know.
you.
I can't give in to AJ Brown this year at all.
And it's tough because I feel AJ Brown is in this similar situation to Tua. You got a great wide receiver too. You got coaches who are going to try and run the ball. Philly is going to be a better running team than Miami. I think Tyreek's a better player than AJ Brown, and I also think Tua is a better passer actually than Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts can throw the ball farther, but as far as accuracy goes, I think Tua's got him beat.
Mm-hmm.
So I think AJ Brown will go as far as Jalen Hurts takes him. It's just I don't know if that's gonna be because like when we're ranking guys, right? Some guys we're ranking at our ceiling. I think wide receiver 13 might be as high as AJ Brown goes this season.
Yeah, that's probably the ceiling. Honestly.
But then I got other guys who are going to be closer to the floor. So there is that give and take when we do our rankings. But yeah, AJ Brown is just a guy that I think might be the same way Mike Williams was last season, of 35 points, and you're like, holy cow, 135 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then the next week is 2 catches, 21 yards, and you're just like, that's kind of how I see the season going, because they're gonna have game scripts where it is we're gonna run the ball 30 times this or 40 times this game, and we're gonna run it first, second, third down every single time, or you can keep running because we can. If Sirianni could, he would run the ball every single play.
He would.
He showed that last year. And so that's what kind of scares me about AJ Brown.
I think the other thing too is I just don't see a world where like AJ Brown gets insane volume, right? And
exactly.
If the Eagles go the route of like I don't want to say force feeding the ball to AJ Brown, but like if AJ Brown has I shouldn't even say that. If Devonte Smith isn't even like a consideration for a wide receiver 4 on your team in fantasy because of AJ Brown, I find it difficult and hard to believe that Sirianni is not going to incorporate some Devonte Smith and Dallas Goedert into that offense.
Yeah. I mean, year 2 is a big breakout year for wide receivers. Who's to say Devonta Smith doesn't all become something special and he's 1B or even 1A in this offense this next year,
Because let's call a spade a spade. Devonte Smith coming out of the draft had the argument and the profile of being the next best wide receiver in the league just because he is so athletic and he's got speed for days.
Well, yeah, the only reason he dropped was his weight. And he kind of proved last year that it doesn't matter. He's good enough to play despite how much he weighs. So these next 4 wide receivers, I'm going to do something a little different. I think we're going to talk about them all at once because I think they all fall in the same category, right? They're guys. 2 of them are wide receiver 2s on their team. One of them is for sure the wide receiver 1, and another guy is kind of fighting for that wide receiver 1 spot. But they're all guys who, if you draft as your first overall wide receiver, you're probably feeling a little bit nervous about, but at the same time, that they have crazy high ceilings. And that is Michael Pittman, T. Higgins, Cortland Sutton, Mike Will. And I read those in order. So Michael Pittman at 14. You have him at 12. Lucas at 15. Me at 16. T. Higgins then at 13. Lucas has him at 12. You at 13. Me at 15. Cortland Sutton's at 12. Lucas has him at 13. You have him at 15. I have him at 12. And then Mike Williams, where Lucas has him at 11, and we both have him at 10. And the reason I want to talk about them all is because if you're let's say you're coming around that turn here, Ty, and you're staring these 4 down, who would you feel most confident as your wide receiver 1? So I'm not asking who you have projected highest. I'm saying you have to pick your wide receiver 1. You want 2 running backs to start or something like that, and now you're staring down your wide receiver 1. Who would you take? Odds are you probably could get 2 of these guys, to be honest, the way that ADPs are right now. Mm-hmm. But let's say you can only pick 1 as your wide receiver 1. Which one of these 4 would you take?
I can immediately rule out Cortland Sutton and T. Higgins. So that leaves Michael Pittman and Mike Williams. And honestly, you could ask me tomorrow. So I will say Mike Williams right now. You could ask me this question tomorrow, and I might say Michael Pittman. Like, honestly, they are 2 very different wide receivers when it comes to fantasy, right?
100%.
But it's a matter of, like, do you want the consistency of Michael Pittman, where you lack then weeks where he can absolutely go off like a Mike Williams can, where you do take, a couple like 7-8 point weeks so that I shouldn't say so that, but then you also get 25, 26, 27 point weeks with Mike Williams, right? Like, it's a matter of just, it's whatever flavor you like is what you'll go with. And for me, right now, I feel Mike Williams. But who knows? Something like within the next couple of days about Michael Pittman is showing out at Indy camp, or Mike Williams seems to be back in that wide receiver 2 role. Then I might say the other person. That's where I'm at.
I don't think it's crazy to say Michael Pittman has the safest floor out of these 4.
I don't think so either.
Because he's the clear wide receiver 1. That's why it would be. Matt Ryan's no slouch. We're not saying he's, great. He's not Joe Burrow. He's not Russell Wilson. He's not Justin Herbert. But Matt Ryan's serviceable for a fantasy wide receivers. So I think he does. Whereas, T. Higgins and Mike Williams are wide receiver 2s on very explosive offenses. I view them pretty much the same player. I just happen to like Justin Herbert more than Joe Burrow. And so I put Mike Williams a little bit higher. But, they're both going to give you, they can score 40 points in a week. They're one of few wide receivers who truly can do that multiple times in a season. But they both proved last year they can give you 4. You could have 3 weeks in a row of 4 points. So to have them as your wide receiver 1 is a little bit nerve-wracking. Now, Cortland Sutton to me here is the interesting one, because I do think that I think I'm talking myself into the fact that I think he has the highest ceiling out of these 4.
Ooh, interesting.
And the reason I say that is because if he truly becomes the wide receiver 1 over Jerry Jeudy, even if he's the 1A, Tyler Lockett has had a wide receiver 5 season. DK Metcalf has had a wide receiver 7 season. Tyler Lockett has had a wide receiver 9 season. He's gotten guys in the top 7 before. Like, it's not like Russell Wilson hasn't done this. And I don't know why it couldn't be Cortland Sutton next. I don't know why he couldn't keep taking that step. We've seen him be he's a big guy. No Tim Patrick. I feel like he's going to be the best red zone threat. He puts up double digits. I don't see any reason he's not a top 10 wide receiver.
Yeah, I can totally see it. I wonder just how much of that was being in Seattle, and not necessarily like not personnel wise, but play calling and scheme wise, because now Russell Wilson is going into the Shanahan tree a little bit with Hackett as the head coach and play caller. So like, we'll see. I think that's the only argument for why he doesn't finish in the top 10, but I'm right. I'm with you. There is a way that he can finish top 10. And honestly, I think it's closer like 50-50 than people want to admit.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to admit, there is definitely an argument for him being outside the top 20, too. Jerry Jeudy takes over as wide receiver 1. All of a sudden, he kind of falls by the wayside. They run the ball more. Russell Wilson barely throws 30 touchdowns. All of a sudden, it changes a lot. Things can change very quickly. But I do think he has the highest ceiling. I'll touch on T. Higgins a little bit more because we didn't really touch on him. But I really like T. Higgins. The only problem for me with T. Higgins is out of the 4 of these guys, he has the highest ADP right now. Mm-hmm. If we're viewing these 4 of his players as really similar, he would therefore be the worst value because you'd have to take him earliest, and we think that these other three guys are going to be very similar to where he is. Now, that doesn't mean that he couldn't finish with 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, 88 receptions. I mean, that's in his range of outcomes. I'm not saying he's bad. I'm just saying comparatively, I would take these other three over T. Higgins most times. That's not to say I have 0 shares of T. Higgins. I've gone back and forth, especially on Underdog, where these guys are like Mike Williams and T. Higgins are going back to back. Then I'm switching up who I take there. But in Sleeper, it's going to be a little more, in your redraft, it's going to be a little different because people do view T. Higgins as more of a stable wide receiver than Mike Williams. But I really don't think that's the case.
No, I think what wins you weeks? It's having the most points.
Mm-hmm.
T. Higgins had one game with over 40 fantasy points, and he had 2 that was like 27, 26, 28 maybe, but that's only 3 games. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the rest of the weeks were hot or were good enough to kind of warrant the ADP of, I don't know, early teens. Not to say, and I think here's the last thing. We're not out on any of the 4 guys that we just talked about.
No, they're in our top 15 for a reason.
They're in our top 15 for a reason. And in the other point too for T. Higgins, defenses are going to pay a lot more attention to Jamar Chase this year.
That's true.
That's going to open. They have to, and not to say that they didn't last year, but Jamar Chase is just going to get that much more attention this year. So look, there's plenty of good to go around to each of these guys. And it's really if you're at a point where you are choosing between these 4 guys, you can't go wrong with any of these guys.
No.
It's just who you want to go with in that moment.
That's true. That's definitely true. So, I mean, that kind of wraps up then that next cluster of wide receivers. I'll give you is there anything else that you want to touch on those wide receivers? I know we did a little unorthodox there and kind of talked about them all at once. But is there any wide receiver that you want to go back to and add more on?
Maybe Michael Pittman, and it's really just because he's going from Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan, and Matt Ryan is. I know we said that Baker Mayfield wasn't a huge upgrade over Sam Darnold. And let's keep it realistic. Going from Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan, where Matt Ryan is at right now, isn't a huge upgrade either. But Matt Ryan has done it before. And teams are going to be focusing a lot more on Jonathan Taylor this year. That bodes well for Michael Pittman. So I know people, and you know exactly who I'm going to refer to here. Some people are just not convinced by Michael Pittman.
Max.
And that's okay. Because I will gladly take him if you are not going to, if you're not going to be in on him. Because I think there's a lot more to like about Michael Pittman than there is to not like about him.
Most definitely. And the reason I asked the question is because I knew you would want to talk more about Michael Pittman. I just asked you indirectly and giving you that opportunity, but I did call you out on it, so I kind of just took everything back. But now we kind of jump into this is like our second tier wide receivers. They're not quite that like elite of the elites anymore, or right now. We're going to get to those guys in a little bit, but these guys are still solid wide receiver ones. We view them as. And it feels wrong to have Tyreek Hill at 10. It just does because we know the ceiling of Tyreek Hill. But the situation has changed. We have to acknowledge it. We can't say that it hasn't. But he was wide receiver 6 in 2021 with Patrick Mahomes. You and Lucas have him at wide receiver 9. I have him down at 11. I feel like I'm going to be wrong. I do because I just know how just much of a game changer he is. But he has Tua. Yeah, we can't argue with that at all. Patrick Mahomes to Tua, no matter how good you think Tua is going to be, is a major downgrade. You throw in Jalen Waddle, who's a guy surprisingly not on our list because we do like him. But again, You have Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill in the same offense with Tua throwing the ball with a coach who has historically come from a run-first offense, right? The situation just doesn't warrant two guys in the top 12 like we're seeing with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert are very different than Tua. It's crazy they were all in the same draft, all drafted within 6 picks of each other, but, that's just how it goes.
That's just how it be sometimes.
Ty, how would you feel taking Tyreek Hill as your wide receiver 1 this season?
I'd hate it, honestly. I'd hate it. And it's not because I don't like Tyreek Hill. I just have no idea what to expect from him this year. And it's not his fault. That's the hardest part. It's not because of him. It's because of the coach. It's because of the personnel. It's you have to keep him close to the top 10 because he is one of the most dynamic, if not the most dynamic football player in the NFL. But gosh, if let's say I'm second round and I took a running back in the first round, so I'm beginning to look for wide receiver, and I'm stuck with like Tyreek Hill, but then like Mike Williams, Cortland Sutton, and the guys that we just talked about, I'm gonna pass on Tyreek. Okay. And that feels weird. And it feels weird to say that Tyreek feels closer to that group of 4 that we just talked about than to a guaranteed top 10 guy. But that's just how it is. That's just where we find ourselves.
Yeah, for sure. I think I feel comfortable taking Tyreek there, knowing those guys are back there. And the reason I am comfortable is because I know those guys are there. I just think you got like a Tyreek Hill, Mike Williams team. Gosh, you could lose some weeks, but holy cow, could you win some weeks?
Oh, wow.
It'd be kind of like a live by the sword, die by the sword kind of a thing. Now, let's say you're there and you took Cooper Kupp at the 104. Do you then start more strongly considering Tyreek Hill? Let's say the running backs you like are gone. You lose Aaron Jones, Leonard Fournette. Somehow Zeke's gone. Just because I know you'd say you take Zeke. Somehow Zeke's gone. Would you consider Tyreek Hill at that point? Or do you just think you're going to have no shares of Tyreek Hill this year?
Man. Part of me says be smart and have 0 shares of Tyreek this year. But having Cooper Kupp as your wide receiver 1 gives you the safety, right? Or Jefferson. They give you the safety of taking a Tyreek Hill. So I guess it also depends on the other running backs that are on the board. Because if I'm like late round 2, right, and then like there's a Javonte, a Saquon,
I guess if Zeke's there, then you could kind of bank on him falling back to you.
Right. So I guess it depends on who is on the board, how the draft has gone. But like I said, the smarter side of me says don't have any shares of Tyreek. It's far risky, and you don't want to start the season off on the wrong foot with your wide receiver 1 not producing like a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, I think if I'm at a 12-man league and I'm at the 210, 211, 212, I just don't think I can physically pass him up just because I know what kind of player he can be. I know the situation. I know like why I shouldn't have him there, but it'd be so hard to pass him up. This next guy, though, I know we're a lot different on than Tyreek Hill. We love having him as our wide receiver 1. That's Mr. Keenan Allen. We've loved Keenan Allen for a long time. I know I've loved him since he last rated his kidney. And we got him as our wide receiver 9 right now. And Lucas has him at 10, you at 11. I am all the way up at wide receiver 7. Tyler, did I read that right? Do you have Mike Williams higher than Keenan Allen this season?
I do.
Can you touch on that a little bit for us? Because that feels like a pretty spicy take.
That is a fairly spicy take. I think this just comes down to more games that I see Mike Williams outscoring Keenan Allen. All right. Keenan Allen could be 16 a week like he was last year. Mike Williams could have 18 a week just because he has some games where he's going off for 30 plus, right? So I think it's just a matter of just how many games you see Mike Williams outscore. I shouldn't say outscore him, but just, finishing as a top 5 wide receiver week to week.
Yeah.
That happened a couple times last year. I just see it happening a little bit more this year. But if you're looking for the safer of the two options in LA, go Keenan Allen.
100%.
Go Keenan Allen.
100%. I think Keenan Allen's going to be pretty good this year. I have him at 170 targets, 114 receptions. So I'm really, really high on Keenan Allen. But I've always been high, and I know that.
Mm-hmm.
The thing with, just touching on Mike Williams again, I think is, he got the bag. They're going to include him more. So I feel like his floor is coming up. So I don't feel like that's as hot of a take as people are going to make it out to be, that you have Mike Williams over Keenan Allen. And like, just looking at logistically, like you said, if Keenan Allen outscores Mike Williams, it's not going to be by as much as when Mike Williams has his pop weeks and he outscores Keenan Allen, And so that's kind of what it's going to make up for it there. All righty, we're at about 50 minutes right now, so we'll kind of speed through these top 8 guys without not giving them the justice they deserve as top 8 guys.
Yeah. I mean, we'll do with 10 minutes. We can roll right through these guys and do them justice.
And most of these guys are self-explanatory as we get to the top. Number 8 is Debo Samuel, who was the wide receiver 2 last season. Obviously, it's going to be a different offense with Trey Lance at the helm. Lucas has him at 8, you at 7, me at 9. We're still expecting some rushing from him. We're still expecting him to be crazy explosive. But how much is Trey Lance going to affect Debo Samuel this year?
I think that's why I have Debo at 7 and not a top 5 option, because I know some people have Debo as a top 5 option. Mm-hmm. But just I wish I had the stat, but there was a significant drop off in the receiving work. I want to say it was after the bye week, because the receiving work kind of went to Ayuk. That's when rushing work came right. Bingo. So if you focus on just the weeks before the bye where he was an elite receiving threat in fantasy, I just don't see those kind of numbers. Those kind of receiving numbers with Trey Lance. And it's not because I don't think Trey Lance can do it. I just think this offense is going to look very different than we've seen it in the past.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibilities. Trey Lance rushes for at least 700 yards.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the guy's got a cannon for an arm, that's for sure, but he's still going to be a rookie who's going to, be in a run-first offense. So we're not saying that we don't believe in Debo anymore. We still think he's as talented as he was last year. It's just with the change of quarterback, with how they used him, we're not expecting 8 rushing touchdowns again, that's for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, 8 rushing touchdowns is a lot.
And it's not like we dropped him a ton. We still have him as our top 10 wide receiver. I'd feel more comfortable taking Debo over Tyreek, that's for sure.
Oh, for sure.
But I'm not going to be reaching on Debo at the end of the first round. He's a middle of the second round kind of guy for me.
Bingo.
Next guy is Mike Evans. And, the closer we get to the season, it's coming a little worrisome. Tom Brady is on a little hiatus right now. Chris Godwin seems to be getting healthy. Are you concerned about Mike Evans? We got him at 7. You have him at 8. Me and Lucas at 7. Are you concerned at all about Mike Evans, or do you just think he's a solid top 10 option?
Part of me is kind of look, Tom Brady said that he would be back after the second preseason game. Right. And just because at the time of recording, there is the first game of the second preseason going on right now. No one said that Brady would be back after the very first game. Mm-hmm. They said he would be back after their game against the Titans. So part of me is just like, let's give it a day or two after that game, and we'll see what happens. And I can understand why it could be a little worrisome for people that he hasn't even communicated to that Todd Bowles doesn't even know when Brady's coming back. I can understand how that could be a little worrisome, but I'm still pumping the brakes a little bit. Let's see when it gets closer, and when a couple days go by, that we can accurately assess the situation, because I think more detail will be known by then.
I would agree. I'm still in on Mike Evans, and like I'm getting a little more worried just because I think Chris Godwin's gonna be back earlier than I thought he would. But Mike Evans can be a top 10 option with 75 receptions because he could legitimately score 16 touchdowns this season.
I think he was last year. I think he had under 80 and finished as a wide receiver 9.
Yeah, and so he doesn't need the ball to be effective. He's gonna catch passes downfield, and he's gonna catch a lot of touchdowns. And we lost Gronk, no AB. Yeah, we got Russell Gage and Julio Jones, but honestly, they're not the same as Gronk and AB. And so I genuinely think he's just such a safe option at the wide receiver 7. And so with talking about a safe option, we're going to talk about a guy who's a little more shaky of an option as far as wide receiver 1s go. And I'll explain why I'm saying that. And that's CD Lamb. We have at 6. You guys both have him at 6. I got him at 8. And the reason I say he's a little more shaky is because we haven't seen him put a wide receiver 1 season together yet. Now, he has no more Amari Cooper. Michael Gallup's not going to be ready to start the season. I mean, this is his offense to command. You know, if there's a year for him to break out, is right now, because he's going to see crazy volume. We know he's got the talent. We've seen it in flashes. We just haven't seen, you know, a consistent push through the entire season. Ty, does CeeDee Lamb have the potential to be the overall wide receiver 1 this season in fantasy football?
Ooh. Man, I'm going to say no. If honestly, let's say this. If Cooper Kupp still had Jared Goff, if Mike Zimmer was still the coach of the Vikings, if Joe Burrow wasn't a Bengal, then yeah, CeeDee Lamb could finish as a wide receiver 1. But there are, I mean, I think it says, I think the best way to explain it, I think you would agree with this. I think Stefan Diggs has a better shot at finishing as a wide receiver 1 than CeeDee Lamb.
Yep. And that's why when we kind of talk about tier breaks, this is our tier break. Because the next 5 guys have a legitimate shot to finish the wide receiver 1 overall. We don't think the rest of these guys do. Maybe you could say Debo Samuel if we see a repeat of what we saw last year. But that feels like a stretch to say we're going to see those kind of numbers again. So we'll transition then to our number 5 guy. And that is Mr. Devonte Adams, who, again, kind of like Tyreek, feels weird to put him at 5 after what we've seen the last couple of years. But you go from one Hall of Famer to another Hall of Famer, and no, I mean, you go from Aaron Rodgers to the sack of potatoes that is Derek Carr. And yeah, you have to come down a little bit.
You have to.
It's not as drastic as Patrick Mahomes to Tua Tagovailoa, but it is definitely a steep jump. And now you add in Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, Josh McDaniels, who's, you know, he's run the ball, been in part of offense that run the ball a ton. They just drafted Zamir White. They have Josh Jacobs. You know, this is a team that's probably going to look to run the ball when they can, but then they got a ton of options to throw it to. We all have him as a wide receiver 5. We are not kind of moving off of that. And I think the biggest part, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just touchdowns. Devonte Adams is not less special, but he's not going to score 14 touchdowns with Derek Carr the same way that he did with Aaron Rodgers. Derek Carr's had 2 seasons where he's thrown over 30 touchdowns. That's it. Aaron Rodgers has had, I think, 2 seasons in the last 12 years where he's thrown under 30 touchdowns. That's the difference. He's still going to get targets. He's still going to get yards. He's just not going to score the same amount of touchdowns that he did with Aaron Rodgers. You have anything you want to add to that?
So you remember Michael Thomas in 2019?
Yes.
It seemed like he was just getting, you know, I mean, he was getting fed the ball, but it was almost like he was being force-fed the ball a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a possibility of that with Devonte Adams?
Definitely could be. I mean, Vegas has got to be feeling the pressure of giving the ball to Devonte Adams as much as possible. You know, you made that big of a trade. So that's definitely a possibility. It's just hard because the difference was they didn't have Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow. You know, Hunter Renfrow's a slot guy. Hunter Renfrow's a guy you can force feed the ball to, and Derek Carr seemed to like him. And Darren Waller's no slouch. So I do think that the targets could be there, and maybe he just ugly volumes his way to a top 1 finish. But I do think he's the least likely out of the next 4 players to finish as a wide receiver 1.
Yeah, and I don't think many people have Devonte Adams inside of their top 3.
Maybe at 3, but I haven't seen him at 1 or 2 for sure.
For sure. And I only bring up the Michael Thomas comparison just because I think when you look at the talent of Devonte Adams compared to all the other weapons, yes, Darren Waller is a very, very good, if not great, tight end. Hunter Renfrow is a very, very good wide receiver. Devonte Adams is still the best wide receiver in football.
100%.
So that kind of talent does, I'll put it this way, it does require the ball. It does. But again, it's more of the scheme, and it's the play calling from Josh McDaniels than anything else.
For sure. All right, we're going to talk about these last 4 guys in 2 groups. And we're going to talk about Stefan Diggs and Jamar Chase first as one group, because I got him at 3. You two got Diggs at 4. And then I got Jamar at 4, and you got him at 3. I think Diggs might be the most consistent player outside of Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson this year, connected to Josh Allen. And I think Stefan Diggs has a legitimate shot to be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy football. It's going to come down to touchdowns for Stefan Diggs. We've seen the yards. We've seen him put up over 1,400 yards. We've seen him catch over 110 passes. It is completely going to come down to touchdowns. Now, Jamar Chase, we look at him. We know he can score touchdowns. We know he can put up yards. Can he either maintain the efficiency that he was at, or is the volume going to keep increasing this season? As far as Jamar Chase, Ty, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think he maintains the efficiency? Do you think volume continues to increase? What do you think?
I think the first thing, let's just talk about volume in total. I think the volume gets an uptick just because he is Jamar Chase. But I look back over, let's see, let me pull up my projections real quick. I kind of had Jamar Chase in the same ballpark as like Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson.
Okay.
But then I looked at his stats from last year, and the fact that he only had like 125 targets was like, oh, that's a little surprising. Mm-hmm. And for him to get, and for my projections to have him in the ballpark as Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson after only getting 125 the year before, that's a pretty big jump, especially in an offense where you have T. Higgins, Joe Mixon, Tyler Boyd, right? Like, it does not seem that likely that he can get just super insane volume, but he will still get wide receiver 1 volume for fantasy purposes. Now the question is efficiency. Does he maintain it? Does he increase it? I think here's the one stat that I can pinpoint and say that's probably going to come back down a little bit. Do you know what his yards per catch was last year?
Oh, it was something ridiculous.
It was 18 yards a catch.
Jeez.
That is insane. It's ridiculous. That has to come back down if our argument of volume goes up a little bit. And let me explain that. The targets can go up, but the receptions may not go up at the same rate. So he finished last year with 125 targets, 80 catches. He could go up to 140 targets, but that doesn't mean that he goes up 15 receptions then.
That's true.
So if he stays at 80 on 140 targets and the yards are relatively the same, it doesn't really matter that much for fantasy.
No,
so
not at all.
I think the only way that he can really kind of improve on what we saw for volume last year is if he becomes like the alpha dog of wide receivers. I just don't see that happening. Not because I don't deny the talent that Jamar Chase is, but defenses are going to be paying more attention to him this year. You've got guys like T. Higgins, and there's a guy named Joe Mixon that had 300 rushing attempts last year. They want to run the ball. They like to run the ball. upgrading the offensive line, sure, protects Burrow. Also, just boosts Joe Mixon's stock even higher than we thought it could go, right? Like, there's a lot of pieces that got to go right in order for Ja'Marr Chase to really kind of take a step forward in terms of efficiency and volume and stuff.
Definitely. And for Stefan Diggs, I'm going to make a quick argument for him, why I really love him this year. And I mean, the main argument is Josh Allen is his quarterback. Second, Stefan Diggs over the last half of the season outscored Ja'Marr Chase. Like, that's something we got to keep in mind. Like, it's not like he was awful, and yet people felt disappointed because he didn't have many boom weeks. He was just that consistent week in and week out. And I think we could see more boom weeks this year. That's all I'm going to say on Stefan Diggs. You know, these are Stefan Diggs. You could get probably beginning of the second round. Ja'Marr Chase is more end of the first round type of player. Both are going to be great. You know, you're kind of picking. It's getting real fine where you're picking these guys at. These next two, we could go back and forth on it for the rest of the day and if they should be one or two. So you give me 30 seconds on Justin Jefferson, why he's the number one. I'll give you 30 seconds on Cooper Kupp, why he's the number one. I'll let you go first.
Justin Jefferson now has Kevin O'Connell as his head coach and play caller, who oversaw Cooper Kupp's Triple Crown year last year, going into a contract year, and a legitimate, let's say, argument. I shouldn't say argument. Motivation to be the best overall wide receiver in the NFL. Justin Jefferson could be the number one overall player in fantasy this year.
I definitely don't doubt that. As for Cooper Kupp, if you took away 25 receptions, 400 yards, and 6 touchdowns last year, he's still the wide receiver one. He was absolutely ridiculous. There is going to be a regression. But I just don't know if he regresses enough to not maintain wide receiver one status. I'm not saying he's going to be Triple Crown again. I'm not saying any of that, but he's still going to be crazy good. And you can't go wrong picking Justin Jefferson or Cooper Kupp. Both are going to be amazing. Both, I mean, you know, we have them. I think when Lucas just released our how the first round should go video, Kupp at 5, Jefferson at 6. You take Jefferson at 5, Kupp at 6, nobody's going to bat an eye. You can go either way. You can't go wrong with those two.
I've seen people ask, like, who should I take, Kupp or Jefferson? It doesn't matter. You're
who
not
do you
gonna...
like more?
It's who do you like more? And here's the best answer I can give you for that question. There's no wrong answer.
No.
You will not be disappointed by either of those guys.
For sure. Alrighty, well, that wraps up our top 20 wide receivers. Thank you for sticking around for all of that. Hopefully our analysis was spot on. I'm sure it was. Going into next week, we are doing our fellas flag plants. So guys that we are all in on. We're doing a mock draft with another special guest. All 3 of us will be on the pod. It will be a great, fantastic time. So make sure you come back and to listen again. We are just so excited. But yeah, that kind of wraps up the pod. Todd, do you have anything for the people that they need to know right now?
Socials, Fantasy Football Fellas on TikTok, FF Fellas on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, honestly. Cam Law 317 on Twitter, Tyler _Plath on Twitter, and Lucas Wenzel on Twitter as well if you want to follow the personal accounts as well. But man, we got some really good episodes coming up, and even better than all of that, we got NFL regular season football right around the corner. I cannot wait.
Before we close this out, I got to say, I don't think Lucas could have done that better. Reading out the socials that quick and that well. I got to applaud you on that. That was fantastic. Very, very well done.
I had a little bit of practice at the beginning. I just needed to get the bad one out of the way, which that one was.
Short it up. It was perfect.
Short it up.
Alrighty. With that, deuces. We will see you next time.
Deuces.